Good morning, everyone. This is Carl Polachuk, and welcome to the Globalization of SMB. One second, let me get my presentation showing. I'm going to start with a few notes for today, and then we will get going. Dave Sobel is joining us. So, welcome, sir. How are you today?
I'm very good. I'm enjoying a beautiful day on the East Coast.
Well, nice. Last time I was there, it was a little on the frosty side, as you recall.
I do. It's finally gotten nice, which is about time.
Well, we've had spectacular weather in Sacramento, so I've been loving it here, getting ready to travel again, as you are. And actually, that's one of the reasons that you're on the show is how much travel. Like this graphic, when I look at it, it reminds me of you.
It kind of feels like my life looking at that.
A lot like that. So here's what we're up to. Just one little note. I always like to point out some books that people might be interested in. There's a great book that I'm about 3/4 of the way through called Why Did the Chicken Cross the World? And it's available as an audiobook if you prefer audio. And it's a great little book about how the basic chicken evolved and how it affected commerce through the ages and how many varieties of chicken there are that even today it's more sophisticated than ever because we have parts that we prefer in the U.S. and they have other parts that they prefer in other countries. And so we don't just ship whole chickens back and forth. We process them and then ship the parts around the world. And the author here actually makes the argument that much of the world economy would collapse if we didn't have chickens. So anyway, it's interesting because you see how interconnected economies have been for thousands and thousands of years. And so a lot of what we're simply becoming aware of in the 21st century today is stuff that has actually been going on for a long time, the interconnectedness of all of these things. So today on the Globalization of SMB, I'm happy to be joined by Dave Sobel, who's a longtime friend of mine. I think we did presentation 10 years ago at one of the conferences.
I think it's going on that long, hasn't it? It feels like that long for sure. It's been ages.
And we've been doing stuff together since then. So I'm very happy to have Dave with us. And Dave has a very interesting background, having started as a managed service provider and then moved into the world of supporting some products. Actually, both of the vendors that you've worked with have been international vendors, so it's kind of an interesting thing. What we're talking about here is kind of the big picture of where we fit in a global economy. If you're interested in looking at the past recordings, they're available at smallbizthoughts.com. Just go to, there's a globalization link on the upper menu. And we're coming up next week. We're going to talk to Richard Tubb from the UK, and then we have other folks coming up. And VJ, and I'm going to completely mutilate his name, but Nayayapati from New Zealand is somebody I ran into, and VJ's got a really interesting story of having started businesses on 3 different continents and intentionally moved to New Zealand because of the economy. So, you know, that's the kind of thing we're looking at, is not just big picture like, oh, how do you work with Amazon or some other intergalactic company, but how do you manage your managed service business in a way that makes sense in the 21st century. So with that, let me share the other slide deck and introduce Dave Sobel. And just let me know when you want to move to the next slide, Dave.
Sure.
So let's start with a little bit about the company you work for, and then talk a bit about kind of the big picture for managed service providers.
Yeah, well, it helps to put who we are into perspective, And so I'm Dave Sobel. Carl, you did a great job introducing me. My background comes from being a service provider, being a solution provider, and running an MSP. Had the opportunity to sell that business about 3 years ago. I loved doing it, and then the opportunity to sell came up, so I took it and decided that I really wanted to learn what it was like on the other side. We spend so much of our time working with vendors as solution providers, but but not many of us have done both. And I said I really wanted to learn that. So I worked with another vendor for a little while, and they were bought, and then had that opportunity then to move to now where I'm at. The company is called LogicNow. You may have known it formerly as GFI Software, and the division that spun out to become LogicNow was formerly GFI Max. So, Carl, you can go ahead and advance here, and I'll just quickly give a little bit of who we are. I'm now in charge of running and helping to manage what is the world's largest community of MSPs, with over 12,000 MSPs in about 100 countries. Carl, you can advance again. We've really dominated the worldwide marketplace. With customers in 100 countries, everything is cloud-based, so we're doing millions of transactions a day. Just from a cloud infrastructure perspective, it's a massive global infrastructure, with data centers in North America, in Europe, in Australia, with data centers in all of the regions that we do business in, and that means we've also are very much a global company. I actually am lucky enough to work from my home office, but so I'm based here just outside Washington, D.C. We have some 7 offices scattered around the U.S. plus 5 across Europe, I think, and the one in Australia, and some people were working remotely in Hong Kong, and really all it has become a global operation. We've run tech support and we run sales on a 24/7 basis. So everything that we do is focused on that. And next slide, Carl.
So let me just ask a question. So
please,
when you first joined what's now Max Focus, it was about 18 months ago, more or less?
Yeah, about then.
You were talking about, hey, very soon we're going to have 10,000 partners.
Yes.
And now it's 12,000. That is phenomenal all by itself.
The number keeps going up. I think we're approaching another update to it too. I think we're not far off for more announcements.
Man.
We try and keep it to those even numbers so that I don't have to worry about the specific number on a daily basis. But yeah, no, the growth has been explosive, and we do great business. Both of us have North American accents, so I always start there. We have great growth in North America, but it's certainly not our only the only area that we're seeing great growth in. We do great business in Europe. Australia is very strong for us. We're doing great business in South Africa and down in South America, in Brazil and in Argentina and countries. We have a great business in the Caribbean, business down in Central America. There's all kinds of areas where there's really cool managed services stuff going on.
Very cool. All righty. So.
And what we do, for those that aren't familiar, just to give you a little bit of perspective, what I think about is the platform. And it's a platform for delivering managed services with end-to-end solutions. So on the next slide, you'll see it generally focuses on 4 major product lines. The first is the remote monitoring and management product, which is what kind of our flagship product and the one we're known the most for. And that's the ability to monitor, alert, repair, and automate, diagnose all the components you would need to do management for your managed services business, all within a single console. And of course, that's including interesting abilities to do things around managed security, so managed antivirus and integrated backup and endpoint web protection. And then you can couple that with some of the other products to extend that even further. So we have a backup in various flavors that you can do, both on-premise and cloud backups. You can do virtualization. You can do bare metal restores. This means a complete backup solution. Carl, we'll flip through each of these, and I can give a little bit of the overview, just again so people understand where I'm coming from. Then we'll talk about the impact of the platform. So on the next slide, talk a little bit about the remote monitoring and management platform. The ability to do asset management, web protection, manage applications in the cloud. So we manage Office 365 and Google Apps. The ability to do automation and scripting and deliver reports to your customers. All the things you would expect to have in a complete managed services platform we've got from MaxRM. On the next slide, talking about the backup solution, being able to do things at a file application or machine level, really great deduplication. We're known for our speed of protection. It's award-winning on how fast the software can do it, allow you to do things on-premise, allow you to roll them into the cloud. And the cool thing about everything that we do is everything is billed on a subscription basis and on a consumption basis. So you only pay for what you use. There's no long-term commitment or difficult, lengthy contracts to engage in. We make it really easy to get started with. On the next slide, we talk about our mail security platform, so the ability to integrate that into everything else with, antivirus, anti-spam, threat detection, and included archiving, so you can meet all of the compliance needs, and ensure against intellectual property theft, both from external targets as well as from employees. Make sure that you always have a full archive of all your email. And finally, we wrap it all together on the next slide with the Mac Service Desk, which is the ability to do end-to-end service management, complete ticket lifecycle management, all from within the single console. Integrates into QuickBooks, so you can do all the work, export and bill it out. It's incredibly simple to use. Doesn't need complex setups and training, and you can do all your scheduling, task management, and we even have what we call Service Desk Voice, which is the ability to take phone calls, log tickets automatically with a special number that we put in for you. So it makes it really, really easy to work with. And that gives you the overview. Everything we've got is available at maxfocus.com. I've done all the bits now to tell you about what we do. If you've got questions, please. We'll have my contact information there. Happy to talk about that stuff. But I know we're gonna talk today more about the globalization trends, because now that you get a sense of kind of what we do and how we look at things, you know that we're looking at it very much on a global basis. And I keep telling Carl, one of the things that I'm really excited about in my role in leading our community is that everybody on my staff is very much focused on thinking about things at a very global level. Traditionally, organizations tend to break down sales and marketing and such very regional, and it makes perfect sense. You have salespeople locally, you have marketing people locally, you engage locally, but somebody's got to think about how do we tie this all together, and how do we bring the collective knowledge of a global community of MSPs, how do we bring that together, help build best practices, help share information, and enable people to make sure you're getting good information from the rest of the world.
So thank you for that. I want to make sure folks know this is not a paid, webinar kind of thing. That
Yep.
I really think it's important that Dave go through this stuff, because I want you to see how things are the same and how they're different around the world. Recently, last fall, I had the opportunity to go to Australia and meet with some partners there. And there were a couple of times when it was really clear in my presentation that they were, they had a different view about how things work, and they would call me up and say, hey, so, the way that you manage employees is different in the U.S. It just is. So you have to be patient with us if we're not getting what you're trying to tell us here,
Yeah.
And so when you travel around, because I think you hit at least 4 continents, right? Maybe 5?
I'm losing track. Let's go with this year. I've been on 3 continents. I know.
Okay.
I've already so far. We're doing this for those who catch it on the recording. We're doing it the end of March, and I've been in Australia. I've been extensively in Europe, and I've been all back and forth over the U.S. a bunch of times already.
So in U.S. and Canada, other than the fact that the first question at every meeting is this available in my country?
Yes.
There's not a huge difference in the laws or the norms about how we operate and so forth. And but in other countries, there are some much bigger differences. Can you tell us a bit about the differences that you've seen?
Yeah, so the big thing of the number one thing is the people issues, and you can even see it in North America between the U.S. and Canada, the differences in employment law. That the difference in employment law and taxation is a big difference between U.S. and Canada, and then that extends further as you look at other countries. So the ability to hire and fire people, it moves at different speeds in different countries. I try really hard to not look at it and say one is better than the other, because they're different. They both have benefits and have disadvantages. In the U.S., many of us live in right-to-work states, Carl, I don't think California is a right-to-work state, but I know Virginia is.
Mm-hmm.
In a right-to-work state, you can come in and that day they can fire you, but you can also quit. It's a pretty clear, clear line where the obligation is every day you have the right to work or essentially the right not to work.
Yeah, in California we call it at-will employment.
Okay, at-will employment.
But at the same time, if you do certain things, if I make you certain promises, I have altered the nature of the at-will employment.
Absolutely, but it's where, for example, you have these very loose employment agreements, where it's essentially a letter might say, you've been offered this job, here's the title, here's the pay, and go forward, so that the base is very limited, in terms of its definition, so that in the event, in the need it's ever needed, you're right to work or at-will employment. In Canada, for example, that's much more of an employment agreement. People actually have contracts. And then when you move into Europe and European countries, the UK and Germany and stuff like that, they have much more detailed contracts. There are very specific guidelines on what's required to end an employment relationship. That's generally true in most countries other than the U.S. that tend to be, varying levels of restrictiveness. Benefits change, and the level of vacation's one that always comes up, or vacation or holiday, depending on your country of choice.
Mm-hmm.
That's one that varies very differently. The expectations around that, not only the amount given, but the expectations. In the U.S., it's not uncommon for an employer to feel comfortable, asking someone to keep an eye on email or communicate something when they're on vacation. And culturally, oftentimes the employees simply do that. Whereas, as a general rule, Europeans tend to be, it seems to be a very clear definition that when you're on a holiday, that is very much disconnected time. The length of time varies greatly, and the culture of that. North Americans tend to take shorter times off than Europeans or Australians, and so there's lots of cultural differences, and there's lots of legal differences around that. It's an interesting challenge when you're trying to manage across those teams, or vice versa when you have customers across boundaries, or you've partners that you're working with across boundaries.
Right. So when you work with the folks in other countries, do they have different expectations of the tools that you sell and kind of like how they deliver these services?
That's where we come back together and sort of say there's an awful lot of similarities. The language of finance is pretty universal. The way you read a P&L, the way you read a balance sheet, those tend to be pretty consistent. And that's where the fundamentals of a business, do remain the same. Now you end up with some different buying habits and different cultures around buying. Americans, for example, tend to be very fast to buy things. They're also fast to change, where Europeans are slower and deliberate as a general rule, and also slower to make a change, or more positively, much more loyal. And they're very focused on that relationship end of it. So but the math of how you deliver the service tends to be pretty consistent. You've got, when we talk about the features and the functions of the products, for example, that tends to be really universal.
Right.
What does change is the expectations around privacy and data management. There's some pretty clear distinctions between where people want their data centers. And it comes not from technical delivery, but from legal and compliance concerns.
We've had several discussions with folks. And this does include Canadians, Australians, pretty much everybody would rather have their data almost anywhere except the U.S.
Yeah, and it's, and I don't want to get into sort of that cultural battle on it. It's interesting because with some of the safe harbor laws and some of the ways that's done, if you actually dig into it, the U.S. can be a very, very compelling place to have your data, even if you're from another country. But at the same time, there are some that there are legal reasons to have them. European law tends to want data to stay within Europe. There are cultural reasons. There are emotional reasons to do that. There are bandwidth reasons. You can see reduced latency by keeping data closer to you. There are lots of different reasons, and I always keep reminding everybody they're not good or bad. They just are. There are differences that need to be understood so that you can think about the way that you're going to do business and what the implications are for your business of working there.
So you have the honor of being the first Microsoft MVP for virtualization. So you were kind of expanding into what we now call the cloud significantly before other people in the business. And when you look at it now, think about if you were an MSP today, would you be quick to try to get clients in other countries knowing that you've got the cloud making it that much easier, or would you still want to be fairly locally based?
Well, you flatter me. I was one of the early MVPs, but certainly not the only first from Microsoft's perspective. But I certainly was one of the early ones. I look and say some of the things that really fascinate me about what's happening with the internet and with the cloud is the ability to run a global business very easily. The world has shifted in a lot of really exciting ways, making it easy to offer services anywhere. I think that there are areas where you can deliver, for example, Office 365 style support services from anywhere. That's an easy platform to manage and to monitor and to deliver those services globally anywhere. And as long as you've got an internet connection, you're really in good shape. I think that there is, I'm pretty comfortable with the idea of my data living in the cloud and living globally. I don't get really hung up on some of the cultural lines. I always say when I talk about, for example, the U.S. government and snooping and all that kind of stuff, unless you're a nation state or a Fortune 50 or maybe Fortune 500 company, that stuff is really outside of your realm of real concern. I kind of know that at some level, no matter where I am at in the world, not only the NSA but MI6 and the German intelligence agency and the Australian, they're all looking. They're all poking around. The NSA got caught with their hand in the cookie jar pretty badly. They're also the nice big prime target because we're the big ones. But I'm pretty confident the Chinese are looking too. And for most of us doing business, particularly in the SMB, these are just things that just don't affect our daily lives. You can just kind of assume it's happening. And from an individual activist perspective, I would implore you to write your government official and make your voice heard. But from a business perspective, they're not factoring in as risk factors for me in terms of the daily management of an SMB business.
All right.
So now I move into the actual concerns around government compliance and security that I think are much more interesting to manage, and they are the ones where there's real concern to think about. I'm much more interested in privacy laws and the specific privacy laws in your country or state than I am about worrying about government spying. Because that's an area where there's real exposure for an SMB that you can bring some actual distinct value, and there's some real expertise to be found and to be delivered, i.e. also offering real opportunity to consult on people that work within this global economy. Think about how much, even over the past 15 years, how much smaller the world has gotten. If I know, Carl, you and I are both kind of fans of travel and stuff. You go back to sort of the late 90s, early 2000s, even when the internet was sort of getting started, the world was pretty distinct. You weren't really thinking about things going on in other countries. Now we actually have people, I mean, literally thinking about how can I get Netflix coming out of the UK, or how can I get American Netflix when I travel, or I mean, that's such a small detail of day-to-day living that you want television shows out of another country.
Right. Well, and so let me tell you a side story. Last year I was in Toronto, and their big news story was, you know, they have domestic content laws so that they
do, yeah.
They don't have all this programming, and this started, I think, in the 80s, but, you know, they don't want their programming to be dominated by the U.S.
Right.
The government is suing the primary porn channel in Canada because they have too much U.S. porn. So they have to produce more Canadian porn in order to be compliant with their domestic content laws.
Yeah, I think it's 30%, because I've worked with some Canadian companies and worked for a Canadian company, and I think 30% of all broadcast content, both radio and television and such, has to be Canadian produced.
Right.
And that's kind of universal, and so, you know, for example, Netflix Canada is different. And they do it based on IP lookup. You take your laptop to Canada and you log into Netflix. The content looks different. My account's still mine. I get billed in U.S. dollars, but I'm not getting the same content. And I've done the same test when you know, one of our head offices is in Edinburgh, Scotland. You know, plug in at night and want to watch a little TV to call it a day. Not everything's the same.
Right. Well, and the other thing is that we are now having entertainment push so much of what we do that, you know, when you travel, you say, okay, am I being billed in U.S. dollars? Am I being billed in something else? Am I going to have what I think is a fading charge, which is the charge to, you know, translate from dollars to euros or to pounds or whatever. I'm seeing less and less of those fees, except with my local bank.
Oh, I know, and it's funny because, I mean, I get offered, you know, I'm checking in at a hotel internationally. They ask me if I want to be charged in dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Like, well, sure. You know, I mean, ultimately, it's all just, you know, it's all currency. So it'll. I know the credit card will translate it if I got charged in pounds, but it's like, wow, I can actually just get charged in my native currency here.
Yeah, I sold a domain into China last year, and they paid in their currency, and I received it in U.S. dollars, and you know, somebody in the middle took a little piece of everybody's action, but everybody dealt in their own native currency, and it just somehow was translated in the cloud, and that changes hour by hour. You know that.
Yeah, completely. And so, you know, it's interesting because, you know, you would think, you know, your typical SMB business is not really thinking, oh, I'm a global organization typically. But they're dealing with other people in foreign countries. They're dealing with businesses that move back and forth. The amount of travel people are doing continues to go up.
Right.
And so,
and you know Robert Crane, he was on a couple months ago, and he has made, you know, a certain amount of his business is people in the U.S. And I've certainly enjoyed relationship with vendors in Europe who are trying to get into the U.S. market, and, you know, like they want to know culturally, like, how do I do this? I wonder if there's the same opportunity for SMBs. Are there companies that want to come into the U.S. that managed service providers might, you know, say, hey, you know, we're flexible. We will help you out. We will help you move in this direction.
Well, I think so. I mean, there's a lot. You know, you see lots of businesses continuing to look at expansion in all kinds of different ways. And again, it's not hard to do. You can set up a global storefront online really easily. And so, you know, with success in different countries, you get interested in moving in new ways. I think that you know, I talk a lot about when I look at managed services. You know, I continue to think that business process consulting and business consulting is where the real differentiator is. If you're really looking to build we do a lot of work around what we call the perpetually valuable MSP and like how you maintain your relevancy ongoing. But I think one of the areas where if you're really looking to maintain your competitive difference, keep your margins and charge premium pricing, understanding business niches and understanding business complexity, that's the real value. It's not about can I, you know, install your Windows machine faster than somebody else can install the Windows machine or stuff. It's about delivering real difference in business value, and this is one more angle that you can definitely explore, because there's a lot of businesses that do this stuff. In my MSP, I had a customer. He was my most profitable customer because he was a small agency. It was him and an assistant, and he paid hundreds of dollars for support, hundreds of dollars a month for support as a full managed services, because his expectation was we dealt with his machine that was running native Japanese, by the way.
Wow.
So I had done where we had a machine in the office set up ready for so that you could follow along click by click, because you'd have to work with his machine by knowing what the icons all looked like. And so we just had one ready, so that it was in English, but we could look at the icons and then we could compare against what he was doing in the field. And he was happy to pay a premium for support, because our assurance was that we were going to be available to him when he needed us on demand with the systems that he needed.
Yeah.
And it was a great relationship. He paid our services. He paid for our services. I loved working with him. It was a highly profitable engagement for us, and we delivered fantastic service to him. That's a real odd little specialization, and we didn't have massive numbers of clients in this space, but the ones we did have there were really good for us.
So when you as a vendor, do you feel like you're changing the product or tuning into several countries at the same time just because there are slightly different requests or requirements from different locales?
We always have to make sure that we listen to partners across the world, and so we do a bunch of different focus groups that are run through the community team. One of my community managers runs them, and she's really focused on making sure that we make sure that we're looking across different geographies correctly. Generally, the services that we deliver, the technical services we deliver in different regions are pretty consistent. Managed services is kind of managed services in a lot of places. It's the business side of how they get delivered, the people and the margins and some of that stuff that can change, and the willingness to buy and the way that it's sold. I always talk about the UK is very much a relationship business in terms of the way that selling is done. The Americans tend to be a little bit more transactional, a lot more transactional sometimes. And so that's a different sell. You're still selling the same sort of core offering, but your approach is different, and the way you think about it and the way you think about the engagement is different. So those are the parts that you have to make sure that you understand.
So one thing that comes to mind for me is the backup. Do folks in other countries say, well, I'm going to click this backup, and then I'm going to choose a data center in Germany or a data center in France or whatever?
Yeah, I tend to find that as a general rule, MSPs, because of their focus on operational efficiency and consistency of delivery, they tend to not try and have things be very different. So they'll pick, if they're a German company, they're going to want to go with our German data centers. If they're an American company, they want to go with American data centers. They're not going to say we want to split over for reasons other than if they do business internationally and those customers have those needs. So for example, if it's a American-based MSP and they have customers in Europe, they may want to have their backups for the European customers in Europe. Because of legal and compliance reasons, but they're shying away from doing it in the MSP space because of the loss of operational efficiency.
Right. So when you look across your clientele, is there a spot where you'd say that there's an opportunity out there where it'd be particularly juicy for folks to say, hey, if you've been thinking about moving across borders, consider setting up managed services here, because there's a lot of opportunity?
I think I'm a little less focused on it being where it's from and more the differentiation of the business knowledge. That we can help you understand data privacy laws across borders. We can help you understand data privacy laws, even across states in the U.S. or across regions in Europe. I mean, there are both European privacy laws and then there are local laws that need to be handled. I think it's much more around differentiating on that business value than specifically saying, we can deliver our services from one country or another.
Right. So now we've talked about how easy it can be. What about the piece where you say, but a lot of people aren't doing it, so I'm going to differentiate myself, because even if it's just perceived to be more difficult, there's still some extra value there.
Well, most definitely. And I mean, look, anything that you don't understand yourself is oftentimes viewed as kind of hard. There are people that go, really, really deep on some of these areas, particularly, when you think about it from the perspective of a Fortune 500 company or a company that's publicly traded or all of these things. There's a lot of complexity there. And so people shy away from it because it's really complicated. I always sort of remind one of my favorite sayings, in mystery there is margin. If it was easy, it wouldn't be as profitable. Don't be turned off by difficult. Know that the investment can pay off when well executed.
Right. So we're open to questions. If anybody's got them, just put them into the little question box. We do have a comment from John who says, Dave's also one of the most handsome men in the MSP space. So there you go.
Why, thank you. My wife will like to hear that.
Always good to know. So anyway, if anybody's got any questions, go ahead and put them in there, because we want to make sure this is interactive if you're interested. So Dave, when you look at obviously you spend a lot of time in the U.S. still, and you're very comfortable here. But when you look at the other countries, do you think that there's a particularly good fit for folks who want to expand into other countries? Is that easier if you're Australian, or easier if you're Canadian, or easier if you're from Europe?
It's interesting to me. I haven't found a particular pattern that I think is particularly easy. I've always been intrigued. I'll sort of throw out, we always talk a lot. I'll just say this is one of my brainstorming ideas, and I've never really done anything with it. I've always been intrigued by the problem of delivering 24/7 coverage. Carl, I mean, you and I have had lots of conversation about this, and I know that, when in your managed services businesses, as you've approached them, you tend to take the tact that everything can be done during business hours. And I tend to actually really agree with you on that. I tend to think that that's very true. But I actually think that there's a certain emotional comfort of the idea of 24/7. Many people want it more for the emotional coverage than the actual need. And I've always been really intrigued by the idea of why managed services providers, a few of them regionally, have not come together to establish a 24/7 support network, because it feels like it would be really easy to implement from a technology perspective. The business process might be a little bit more difficult, but you can really differentiate yourself with a systematic way of handing off work globally. You're in the East Coast. You need to cover after hours. The Australians are awake. It's business hours for them.
Right.
I know no one has really attacked this from an SMB collaborative partner perspective, and I've always been intrigued as to why not.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. There have always been a few stories, in the space of, somebody had this call and we routed it to, somebody in Australia who worked on it for several hours and then passed it to somebody in the U.S. and then they passed it, around the globe, basically.
Yep.
But there isn't, as far as I know, a formal organization to actually provide that level of service going forward, and that might be an opportunity for some folks. So
yeah, and so it's ideas like that I think are the ones that kind of intrigue me. That there's got to be a way. There are ways of collaborating, because organizations like ours does it. We do it internally. Now it helps that we can standardize across, like a global support team. But we hand off work from one regional support team to another to ensure 24/7 coverage.
Right. So there is a comment from John that says we find so much business within 50 miles of us in the SMB managed service space that we don't need to look up elsewhere.
Well, good. Then that's awesome. You know, it is ultimately about differentiation. So if you're finding plenty of business, that's more the measurement of success. I think we're sort of exploring the idea of how, you know, the idea we just talked about is one that you could potentially look at differentiating in your own marketplace. People are constantly concerned about competing with their, you know, with the guy down the street. These are ways of differentiating your own business, even just competing locally.
Yeah, I think that, you know, I've met so many people who have businesses in other countries or are working with businesses in other countries that it just seems like it's just a ripe opportunity to say that's one of the things that we do. You know, I know a guy who actually, he owns a business. He's in the U.S., but he owns a business in the Philippines. And, you know, just the willingness to be able to do that and to assist him, because when you know, when he looks for like the ultimate virtual desktop, it needs speed in the U.S., speed in the Philippines, and it needs, you know, the server to literally sit next to those virtual desktops, wherever that is, you know.
Yeah.
You know, so that's the kind of thing where I think there's opportunity there, and I think that those kinds of clients will grow significantly in the next 10 years.
I'd agree. I mean, we've got a customer who has a business in Maryland, and he lives in Bolivia. And runs his business from Bolivia and has some local customers there too, and he's done the whole same sort of thing where he's running a remote business. You know, there's all kinds of interesting combinations that are possible. To John's point, if you're doing great on your existing business model, I'm not here advocating saying, you know, you have to pivot. This is not one of those things where you've got to change things. This is more a discussion around there are other opportunities, there are other differentiators, and you're in the unique spot of if you need or want to look for different other business models, there are other opportunities out there right now.
Right. And when you go to, I know that you're doing partner conferences in other countries, do those folks go outside their borders, or do they also stay within 50 miles or 20 kilometers or whatever?
You know, let's go with a little bit of both. We find, you know, particularly in Europe, I always find this interesting trend. You know, I talk to a lot of partners in the UK, for example, and they'll tell me, "Oh, well, we service all over the UK," and they're right, they do. The bulk of their business will be within a 15 or 20 mile radius.
Right.
They'll service all over the UK, but then additionally, they'll have customers on mainland Europe or customers in the US. Because they've got satellite offices or branch offices or remote relationships. So it's the finding ways to differentiate and do something different that are kind of intriguing to me.
Right. Peter asked the question, can you roughly break down the count of existing partners in North America versus other?
You mean like the total partner population or just what we look at?
Yeah, of Max Focus.
So it's, you know, and as a general rule, we don't really break it down publicly, but I'll give some estimates. I mean, North America is our largest single market, you know, by a lot. And actually, it's interesting because we started, the company's origins are as a European company. So North America is our largest. Europe is number 2. The UK making up the largest portion of that. Germany coming in right behind the UK. Australia is a pretty significant market for us. It drops in terms of size once we move outside those ones as much. We've got a pretty sizable business in the Nordics. Benelux, that whole Benelux region is big for us in terms of next stacking. Then we've got significant presence in France and Spain and Italy and the Western European countries. I don't generally break it down by exact percentages, partly because it's hard to keep track. They change on a pretty regular basis, the specific numbers. So.
And how many staff do you have as you're the director of partner community globally? So how many folks work with you because I know you've got some people in the U.S. in Charlotte, right? And my guys in Los Angeles, and but you got people all over. So roughly how many?
So maybe, and you're just asking sort of on the community team?
Yeah.
So my team is 8 people right now, with 2 open recs. No, 1 open rec because I just hired. So I will have we'll have 4 people in the UK, and the rest of us are all North American based right now. We do lots of plane travel, and so it's it's that sort of we're about I think I'm 8 people actively right now, and I'll be 10 by the end of the year. Is my expectation. A lot of it's broken down into 2 categories. I've got the community managers, are the people that most people see. So Jeff Schroeder, Kelly O'Bray, Nadia Karsorios, the people, myself, the people that travel, and then we've got our team in the who do all the logistics of everything. We do 3 conferences a year, and we visit some 120 trade shows globally. So we've got a team of people that make sure that the programs and projects are all running really well. So that's all my what I call my community executives and my community associates that are in the office making sure that we're on track. So.
Well, thank you for that. So James says, when going global, does the cultural differences in ethics and principles create issues in trust when partnering?
Oh, that's a great question. It's there's a certain degree of some element of trust is universal. It's built different ways culturally. Different people respond to different things. I find my advice, and I sort of say this as an American clearly, is the Americans do very well by being humble and open when you travel. If you're willing to listen and you're willing to learn, you'll do really well when you travel. If you believe you know everything and you tell them as much, they don't respond too well to that. But I also hope a little bit more, and maybe this is just my eternal optimism coming out. But people in generally are generally good. People are generally good people, and if you are genuine to them, they're going to respond and be genuine back. The trust building process is different for different countries, and they respond to different things. But people respond to genuineness pretty much globally. And that's been my piece of it. You got to trust is earned, trust is built, and but making a distinct effort to do so gets you great rewards.
And so, even though you have this odd accent, your company is generally considered to be Scottish, right? Even though it's really based in another European country.
Home base is now Scotland. That's all official with LogicNow. So if we talk about culturally and such, we are very much a Scottish company at our core.
Does that help?
I think it certainly helps in Europe. Is that Europeans like dealing with other Europeans. That generally goes really well, and Americans like dealing with good people. And we've got pretty significant American presence, and we do we've got a lot of local folks working with us here, and so I think the main thing about it is that ear of sensitivity, the fact that we try and be, you're getting both a global perspective and you're getting local people working with you. I think that's the sort of the balance that makes us successful.
And nobody doesn't like Scotland.
Well, there's that too. Who doesn't like the Scots? The English and the Scots have a nice rivalry, but they all generally get along. Right.
Very good. All right. Any other questions from folks? We're about 50 minutes in, so if that's it, then I think that we'll go ahead and conclude. I do want to mention we got stuff coming up, and Richard Tubb will be here next month on April 28th, so make sure that you sign up for that and join us then. And if there are no other questions, I think that will be it for the day. So,
well, thank you for having me on, Carl. This is always fun, and if people have follow-ups, I would always happy to connect and talk to people. You've got my contact information. Love talking about this and any other kind of topic. Find me on LinkedIn. Find me on Twitter. These are a great place to keep the conversation going.
Very good. Well, thank you, sir. I certainly appreciate your time, and I appreciate all the folks who who dialed in and registered for this. And I will see you all next month. So we got lots of people saying thank you and good stuff. So thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Anytime, Carl. Always a pleasure.